Bartholomew Town.
Welcome into Bartholomew Town. I'm Bill Bartholomew. We continue our coverage of the Washington Bridge debacle, something that is, look, if you've tried to drive in or around the capital city in any time really the last couple of years, you know the traffic, you know the annoyance, and you know the reality that all of a sudden out of nowhere, your life changed from a commuter standpoint. If you're a small business, it changed from an economic standpoint in December of 2023. Now, the travel of this story has been something that has been intentionally elongated in terms of getting answers. Right now, the state of Rhode Island is pursuing a lawsuit against 13 outside contractors. They claim these contractors hold the vast majority of responsibility when it comes to the deterioration of the Washington Bridge that ultimately led to the closure in December of 2023. And that the state is saying, hey, wait a second, it's not our fault. We're totally immune from any responsibility here. That's been their position. It's also been the position of Governor McKee as to why he doesn't want to, one, fire Peter Alviti, the director of the Department of Transportation, or give the state of Rhode Island insight into at least where we are right now and what the state knows about the breakdown of the Washington Bridge. And a lot of questions that are going to potentially never be answered if this thing goes to a grand jury situation with those contractors. That's something that's on a lot of people's minds. Casey Jones is an engineer who maintains a YouTube channel inclusive of really doing significant work on the Washington Bridge fiasco, evaluating technical aspects of it and broad aspects of this entire story, and joins us once again here on Bartholomew Town. Casey, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Bill. Appreciate it.
Executive summary, if you will, of your background and how you ended up getting involved in the Washington Bridge fiasco.
So I started my engineering YouTube channel about 2 years ago in July 2023. And initially, I own my own company that I run for deep foundation testing, primarily construction phase testing of bridge foundations, drilled shafts, driven pile. But I've been involved with bridges almost exclusively with my work for the last 25 years. So I routinely work in about 12 states. Most of the projects I work on are DOT-funded projects. I'm typically working for contractors, but also interface with other engineers, DOT representatives, and so on. So initially, I started the channel thinking, oh, well, this will get me more exposure, and perhaps people can reach out to me for their testing needs or consulting about their projects. And then I pivoted a little bit to cover more broader interest, infrastructure stories, buildings, bridges, disasters, that sort of thing. And the channel kind of took on a life of its own, and now it's its own thing. So, I find myself really wanting to serve an audience, people who may not come from technical backgrounds, but enjoy learning things. I have a really engaged audience. And of course, I found out about the closure of the Washington Bridge in December 2023. And right out of the gate, I thought, man, something's not right here. And I suspect I'll do, a handful of videos on this topic. And I'm almost 40 videos in. I've got 250 videos on my channel. I didn't intend to have it be such a dominant thing, but there's so many facets to it that it really deserve to be addressed.
What really shocked a lot of people out of the gate, I think, as they were observing this story back in December of 2023, and I was live on the radio with Dan York and Steve Klampkin on WPRO, and all of a sudden, breaking news, the Washington Bridge is suddenly and out of nowhere being closed. And there was a couple of weeks really of just traffic confusion. It initially was one of those things where people were going, wow, what a nuisance, what a traffic logistical nightmare. And then suddenly the initial story put forth by the DOT that a young engineer happened to discover some broken component of the bridge, that maybe a heavy truck went over it and broke it. That all started to shift quite dramatically as discussions about cantilevers became more relevant to more and more people that probably never even heard the word before. Just kind of the initial travel of this story from the early days until now, and we'll get into the latest that you've been reporting on over these last weeks. But from your standpoint, this wasn't a heavy truck that went over the bridge and broke it one random December day, right? This seems to be impossible if it weren't for a years-long, if not decades-long, deterioration of the project.
That's right. So if you think about the bridge beams that are supporting the deck that everybody drives over, there are balanced and unbalanced cantilevers. So think of it like a teeter-totter. And let's say you weigh 100 pounds and somebody's going to get on the other side that weighs 200 pounds, but you don't want to go all the way up. So you're anchored to the ground, right? So the 200-pound person could sit down there and you're 100 pounds and you're still level. That's what those anchor rods did with that bridge deck. But then they broke, and available evidence shows that they've been broken for years. And apparently, as part of this rehabilitation work, there was an engineer out there. This is the narrative that's been put out there, and saw excessive deflection of the bridge deck, which I believe somebody could observe if they were in that area, and had better access because of work that was going on, and looked and saw that the anchor bolt was broken. And that caused a lot of alarm. That was discovered, I think, on December 8th, which was a Friday. They didn't actually close the bridge until Monday, which I think's inexcusable. If you see something that's like a giant red flag, hey, we may have a big problem here, it takes over 2 days to reach that decision. And anyway, it was just the tip of the iceberg, because they thought that, oh, they could do a quick rod repair. The bridge will be down for 3 weeks. Then it's going to be 3 months. And it's, oh no, we got to tear it down and replace it. So the look wasn't good in terms of the DOT and the Rhode Island state government even presenting that they understood what the situation was.
Right. And with that came, look, a number of different things, some of them performative, some of them attempts at communication. One was an oversight committee hearing, a joint oversight committee hearing between the Rhode Island House and Senate. Really didn't yield anything substantial at all. It was not a scenario where Peter Alviti sat there, the director of the Department of Transportation, sat there and offered anything really new. They just kind of explained how great a job they've done with other bridges during that particular event. Time went on. They've done a little bit better job managing the traffic flow, but now all of a sudden that seems to be getting bad again. That may just be a momentary debacle in and of itself, or it might be just the way things are going to be as the demolition of that bridge continues. Fast forward to today. Look, it's a politically charged situation. There's no doubt about that, because we're going into a governor's race, and Helena Bonanno Folks, who's challenging Governor Dan McKee in a Democrat primary, she's made the case, or is trying to make the case, hey, look, this bridge, this was under Dan McKee. He's responsible ultimately. And that's become a political level discussion. But the bigger picture is the health of the state, the health of our infrastructure, and how we got here. As part of trying to figure out how we've gotten here, in 2024, Governor Dan McKee ordered essentially an audit, a forensic audit of the bridge. That's the West Janing report that was leaked a couple of weeks ago, ultimately published by Attorney General Peter Neronha. Now, it's a draft report, but from your standpoint, what are the big takeaways from that audit that was posted a couple of weeks ago, that was released by What's Going On in Rhode Island and published ultimately by the Attorney General on their website, in terms of what happened?
The big takeaways to me were that there was widespread deterioration of that bridge that go back decades, go back at least to the 90s. And it wasn't just the broken anchor rods. It was the post-tension elements, the concrete elements, where there was deterioration of the tendons. There was gaps between the tendons that inside the concrete, they're supposed to be grouted to lock them in place and prevent further corrosion. The report pointed to something I've been saying in my videos for a long time, and that is Rhode Island DOT has the ultimate responsibility for conducting the inspection of these bridges. It comes right out of their bridge manual. It's consistent with federal rules. You can't delegate that to other people. And so that was the real takeaway to me, is that, well, they reiterated what I've been saying all along, is that the biggest failure of this was that there was a lot of things deteriorating with the bridge. Apparently, there were things that no one saw. And to the extent they did see things, it went unaddressed for years in terms of repair and maintenance. And I knew somebody was going to hone in on one of the concluding paragraphs where it said, well, there's enough blame to go around for everybody. And of course, the DOT said, see, that's why we have the lawsuit. I'm like, wait a minute, did you miss the part where they said that you're responsible for this ultimately? And the other takeaway, and I've covered this in a couple of videos, is that I thought was extremely odd that one of the primary purposes of that forensic report was to address what caused the failure of those post-tension rods whose discovery led to the immediate closure of the bridge. Well, 2 days later. And it was separated out apparently as its own memo in the middle of February 2024. And then this draft report was issued April 5th, 2024. And the metallurgical report was just included as a footnote on page 14. It should have been, I think, included as an appendix. To me, I thought that was really odd. I've also, well, I don't want to get ahead of you, but I think there was a lot of stage management going on from Rhode Island DOT and other government officials to see if they could massage how things were presented. And I have to be careful here because I don't want to accuse WJE of doing anything improper. But if you just take it as a whole, if you're hired to address why the rods broke and you issue a separate report, that addresses that was the first bullet item in their scope of work. I don't like that.
Mm. And that's something that you've discussed in your most recent video, which I watched today, the travel back and forth of email, which has been included in a large trove of documentation related to the Washington Bridge that is like you said on your show that I watched this morning. Some members of the media have it. And look, inside this trove, there are a lot of documents that are difficult to make sense of for a layperson. And then there's a lot of emails as well. And including the emails you described in your show this morning between RIDOT and West Janney. And there's some unusual things that you point out, or at least to you seemed unusual about that. What kind of building on what you were just describing there, what is the unusual aspect of this back and forth between RIDOT and West Janney, or at least how the auditor, West Janney, is perceiving that relationship?
Well, I've been involved with doing expert testimony or writing expert reports. And in the email communication between WJE and RIDOT, there's references to RIDOT expecting daily briefings on the status of this evaluation. And that's really cumbersome, and it actually interferes with what you're doing. I mean, I test bridge foundations almost every day of the week, and it's really annoying when, there's a whole process to evaluate the data, to write the report, quality checks, and so on. And if you've got a client calling you every day, well, how's it going? How's it going? It's like, well, I could be working on my report instead of telling you that I'm working on my report. So to me, it just, I think the DOT and the government of Rhode Island just had a complete freak out that they had to close this bridge, which is understandable. But I think baser instincts, in my opinion, kicked in that, hey, let's find out what happened. And if the news comes back that points an unfavorable light towards us, we've got to smooth this over. We got to make sure the report stays draft so that it's not subject to disclosure rules in terms of the public records regulations. I mean, that's shady. I don't understand why the report about the broken rods was separate. The metallurgical report was separate from the main report. I don't understand that. Director Alviti said that he didn't want to be involved with this forensic evaluation. It was supposed to be independent. The governor said it was going to be independent. And yet there's references in these emails to meetings attended by Director Alviti. And the inference is that they were very specific to technical matters, not broader issues about schedule or scope. So I think, the state of Rhode Island had a choice to say, hey, there looks like a systematic error. If we had to close a bridge that we didn't expect to close, what are the implications? How did that happen? How do we assure the public that it won't happen again, or it couldn't happen on other bridges? I give an example. Iowa DOT had to close a bridge. They're building a new bridge right next to one, and there's a lot of similarities actually with the Washington Bridge. They had problems during construction. They had excessive movement of the existing bridge. They had to close it 2 years early before there's going to be a replacement bridge. Tremendous hardship for the locals there. But they were just very forthcoming about what happened, why it happened, what they were going to do about it. They didn't say, oh, let's sue 13 people and we won't talk about it until it comes out in court.
Right. Huge difference. And I think the reality is this may, if it does, in fact, go to trial, it's it's going to take a while. It's not like this is going to happen, over the winter here. This is something that we'll get between the discovery process and ultimately the court calendar. It's going to take a while to even go to trial. So in an immediate sense, Rhode Islanders, and by the way, this is bigger than Rhode Island because you're talking about a major thoroughfare that connects Southeast Massachusetts. And now the traffic spills over oftentimes onto 95 north in and around, actually 95 south as well. When you're talking about coming from Boston, something I do many days per week, you hit traffic that you never hit before. When you're coming north from New York City, you hit traffic you never hit before. This is a regional problem. And people are wondering what happened and can this happen again? And to those people who are looking for those answers, do you think they're going to get them?
I think the lawsuit, in my view, was designed to avoid political accountability, or at least to postpone it. So based on the current trial schedule, as I understand it, you'll already have your gubernatorial election. If Director Alviti stays in that position, you would think that another 2 to 4 years would ease him right into retirement before this stuff comes home to roost. It's pretty obvious. And I think my initial view was, yeah, it was political cover, and it was just going to be a shakedown of these companies' insurance. A lot of professional liability insurers, they don't want protracted litigation. They have an incentive to settle. They might get a company, cough up $2 million here, $2 million there. It's pocket change. They spent at least $5 million in direct costs on this lawsuit, from what I understand. Then you have the indirect costs of other contractors, no doubt, raising their fees for work as a contingency to deal with a problem client like Rhode Island DOT, in my opinion. So I think, I don't know, it could go either way on this thing. It depends on how much anger there is. Mm-hmm. Initially when the bridge closed, there was a lot of anger. In part of my recent research for videos, I saw a WPRI interview with Governor Dan McKee, and they were very direct, forceful questions. And when the governor came back with really lame excuses and evasive, he wasn't answering the questions, the interviewer went back time and again and flatly told him, "You're not answering my question." And I haven't seen that kind of engagement with the local media really in the ensuing months. There's been spots here and there, but it hasn't been consistent. And it just seems like the governor's tactics of trying to tell people, "Oh, you're messing with our lawsuit. What's next? You're not a patriot. You're not a good citizen of Rhode Island if you ask questions about what happened with this bridge." This is the most thin-skinned governor I think I've seen in recent memory. The fact that he and Alviti were taking shots at me in their January press conference in early 2025, thought, man, that's really punching down. Do they really have time to even mention me even indirectly? It's like, so I didn't take it personally. I took it as, hey, I'm onto something here. Yeah. If they're being that defensive.
And what's also interesting is the tactic that they've been using is, look, hey, we're going to, the bridge, it may or may not have almost collapsed. Good news, we got out in front of it. And now congratulations, everybody. Congratulations, Rhode Island. You're going to have a brand new Washington Bridge in a couple of years. So they're trying to spin it as, all right, well, the good news is we kept you safe. We kept you out of the water if you were a motorist going over that bridge at any given point in time. And now, great news. We got a new bridge coming. Everybody relax. They've got signage trying to placate people that says, thanks for your patience as we build a new bridge. On time, on budget, $427.9 million. It should be open in November 2028. So they've tried to spin this thing from a crisis management situation to a somewhat proactive infrastructure project, something like building a new school. And I think that has landed really poorly with Rhode Islanders, who have been stuck with this, annoyance at minimum, if not deep concern, for nearly 2 years now.
They've handled it poorly all along, in my opinion. They weren't proactive about anything here. In the normal course of a bridge replacement project, you identify what the problems are. Most states will come up with a preliminary design. They'll put it out for bid. There is also design, build, delivery mechanisms, but it's planned years in advance. And really what happened is the people of Rhode Island were living under the sword of Damocles. The sword, the guys at the banquet and the sword's hanging by, it turns out, a single horsehair, right?
Exactly.
And that's what people had. The condition that led to the immediate closure of the bridge in December 2023 existed for years. I mean, people need to wrap their head around that. You know, they were just blithely going to work, going to school, and the bridge was in a very precarious condition based on the available evidence. And so what they do, they decide to, try and stage manage with multiple firms. Let's go out to 6 people, and there's probably going to be at least one firm that says something that we like. Is kind of my view of it. And then they early on decided, oh, well, let's file all these lawsuits, and then we can't talk about it. And then let's rush a design build request for proposal that has completely unrealistic risk profile and disincentives and incentives that can't even be realized. And guess what? Nobody bids on it. And so we've built in an extra year delay. But don't worry, we've got one of the top bridge firms involved now. It's like, wait a minute. You had to shut the bridge down in a panic. You didn't know what was going on with the bridge. When you got an inkling what happened, you covered it up with a lawsuit. You bungled the first request for proposal to replace this bridge, delayed it a year, and you're still doing demo, and the construction for the new bridge hasn't even begun. So that's the scenario.
Right. With a request for information sandwiched in between the failed request for proposal, the initial one, and then the latter one, the one that is now currently in progress. As I understand, the reality is the kind of last thing here is, I've heard from some people who are industrially connected in terms of anything to do with engineering or structural engineering or bridge design. And they've said, hey, one of the biggest problems here is that now the state's suing these contractors. It's making Rhode Island an unattractive place for a firm to want to work, for a firm to bid. I'm sure that this isn't going to completely eliminate all of the bids on projects in Rhode Island because it's big money. At the same time, do you sense that this could damage Rhode Island's ability to attract top talent in future projects or in future concepts even of projects because of the nature of the state suing the 13 contractors?
I think so. I've actually said this before on some of my videos. I mean, I've seen it firsthand. I'll give you an example. Arkansas Department of Transportation are stringent isn't even the right word. I think they're unrealistic in expecting perfection with drill shaft foundation construction. And as a result, with contractors just pulling their hair out and having all these additional costs trying to appease them in the construction of these foundations, they've just given up bidding bridge work in Arkansas. That happens. And then I know for the people who still hang in there, they build in a lot of contingencies. So you may have still people willing to do work in Rhode Island, but you're going to pay for it. And you're going to pay more than you otherwise would have if you had instead of having a more open and transparent DOT, in my opinion.
So much to keep an eye on here. We'll continue to monitor it. Up next, sometime in November, an oversight committee hearing, a joint one between the Senate and the House here in Rhode Island. Will Peter Alvini and others from the Department of Transportation be under oath? Will they plead the fifth? How will this all go? Will there be anything productive that comes from it? That's something we'll keep an eye on, as well as the continuation of documents that have ties to this project. Casey, you've been doing an amazing job of analyzing those and putting them forth on your channel. Casey Jones, Professional Engineer on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe immediately. You don't want to miss it. Number one, if you're interested in the Washington Bridge, but just in general, you provide significantly advanced analysis on this broad topic when it comes to other projects as well. Any other thoughts on this today as we get ready to wrap it up?
No, Bill, I appreciate you covering this topic and as you have in the past, and we'll see what happens here.